What's going on? It's your boy DameSmiff, and this morning we're gonna have a discussion about protesting as an artist and why it's effective, why it is not effective, what really you should be thinking about and considering if you want to protest anything like that. And so if you enjoy conversations like this, make sure you hit the like button so that way you can tell others that content like this is dope, and also hit the subscribe button. That way you can also catch my latest live streams. So we're going to actually go over a lot of different things as far as what protesting really is, what it means, and of course current events, right? And so this came across my table because of what happened recently. And the story that we're about to cover is of an Iranian band and their protest against their own government and how their government responded to them, right? That's the overarching theme of this episode, right? And the reason we're doing that is because what you're going to notice is that regardless of how they felt about their reason for protesting, the outcome was almost mandatory, right? And so I want you to keep that in mind as we have this conversation and go through it, because then you can make wise decisions about the approach to protesting, right? And then also understand whether or not it's valuable to be a protester if you want to actually have a music career, okay? So let's get into it. So if you haven't heard of this story, it's of this Iranian band, and I want to actually get the band's name, but essentially it's more so surrounded by around this singer, the lead singer of the band. Now that's important to point out because what they're trying to protest and why we're focusing on the lead singer and not the names of the entire band plays a role in the approach and how they're protesting, as well as the consequences that they were given, okay? So when we're considering protesting, do we ever consider the outcomes, right? I know we want what we're asking for, demanding for in a protest, right? You want to shake things up and change things into your own vision, right? But at what cost, right? And so a lot of people, when they look at protests and stuff like that, you see people in the streets, or maybe you see somebody being defiant, or maybe you see people just kind of like being destructive in some ways, right? But protest doesn't necessarily have to look like that if you want to actually thrive, right? So there is actually a belief that if you're going to protest something, you're going to have to risk going to jail, or you got to risk dying and stuff like that. And that's not necessarily the case. If you think of, let's say, a pathogen or a virus or something like that, right? If that were to get into your bloodstream or your system or your body's little ecosystem, right? What that virus is trying to do is to live longer. It's trying to grow stronger, multiply, thrive, right? It's not self-destructive in order to get the message across, right? And this is the thing I've noticed that particularly comes from people that have this kind of like defeated mentality. And that's why I think they're or I guess you're not harping, but really like sticking it to the point of that the lead singer is female, right? And so when you have situations where the destruction or the, I guess you can say, tearing down of a woman gives everybody else motivation to do the right thing, this is a great example of it. So the the performance was actually not actually titled under their name, but we do have the names of all the members and things like that, but they don't have a specific name. So to give you the name is Parastoo Ahmadi. That's the name of the lead singer, which is the name that they performed under. And essentially all that really occurred, right? Just to give you context, is that her and her production team, including several musicians, they have reportedly been sentenced to court or by a court and the QOM, and they are actually charged with 74 lashes each, alongside a 2-year travel ban and a 2-year ban on all artistic activities. Okay. So it's actually pronounced court in coom. So just so you're clear, 74 lashes is basically you get whipped, right? And there's footage of it online. I don't know if it's actual footage or things like that, but basically they put like a big cover over your back, and then the officer or whoever's leading it, I guess, I don't know what they would call the person, is counting out each of the lashes, right? And they're like It's kind of like if your parent were to put a blanket over you and then strike you with a belt type of thing. Now, for most people, you're like, oh, that doesn't seem bad, like as I'm explaining it, but the number 74 is really the part that is going to make it a consequence and a punishment, because once you get to like 30, you're going to start to really like feel a lot of pain, right? But the point here is that they have to go through 74 lashes, right? So don't think they're getting like Kunta Kinte whippings. It's literally like a procedure thing, right? Alongside a 2-year travel ban. So you can't leave for 2 years. Was that like almost 800 days? And a 2-year ban on artistic activities, okay? But that means you can't even paint. You can't whistle and dance. You can't knit and craft and crochet. And so what I'm pointing out to you here is that because they chose to do this performance, they are now punished not only with the 74 lashes, which everybody is trying to really make the big deal here, because there's a female involved and she's being lashed in a government that isn't very pro-female. So that's the story that the news is running. But what we're going to do is we're going to tie it to musicians. And I want you to think about if you were in a band, or if you were a cameraman, or if you had some kind of job at a record label, and the band that you're working with gets banned for about 2 years, can't travel and can't create. Now, how would that affect you? So for most people, when they're thinking about a lot of the things that they're working on and what they're striving for, doing this is an extreme hindrance. So I don't understand why somebody would try to do that unless they wanted to stop doing the thing that they think is helping them thrive. So for most people, when they're considering doing different things, they're not really trying to really plan for what the future has. They're really more so planning for what they want. And a lot of times when they're doing that, the cost comes at a greater value, meaning that you're affecting people around you. You're also affecting the general progress that you've built up, the investments that you've been building up this entire time. That's what we talk about here all the time. So doing that is the consequence of your protest. That's the point we need to understand here. So now that we've gotten the general context of what occurred, now we can understand deeper as to why they're protesting and what they're doing it for, right? So I have some notes here, and it says that the charges stem from a viral December 2024 YouTube live stream concert where Ahmadi performed their patriotic anthem, Azkun Javani Vatan, which means from the blood of the youth and the homeland, without a mandatory hijab. Okay, so just in plain terms, she basically performed without a hijab, which is mandatory for women to do on camera in her government and in her land, right? And so they're rebelling against that specific thing. Now, as far as her personal connection to that thing, I don't know. Maybe that's a thing that's in the music or whatever. But they're trying to basically use the symbolism of their lead singer's femininity as a way to pass on the message of what they're trying to say, which is to resist this regime or this idea, right? Along with the lyrics of the song and the message within the song, right? So the Kun Provincial Criminal Court convicted the group of offending public decency and distributing vulgar and immoral content online. The audienceless, dimly lit performance featured lyrics referencing imprisoned Iranian youth and directly challenged state bans on solo female public singing and mandatory dress codes. Okay, so just so we can be clear, they are going up against the, I guess it would be a law of offending public decency and distributing vulgar and immoral content, right? And what they did as a fact was they performed a song on a YouTube live stream and the woman wasn't wearing a hijab. For most of us who hear this, and the human rights advocates and things like that, and they hear this, they're like, wow, that's crazy, that sucks. But the point that I want to really drive home here is not whether or not we think that sucks or that should be, or whether that's that makes sense in the world or whatever. I don't want to get to that point. What I want to focus on here is that they knew the consequence of their actions the entire time. Okay. So human rights advocates and fellow Iranian artists have emphasized that the group chose to move forward regardless of the danger. Okay. Now we use danger in the sense of like, I'm assuming in what I'm reading this in the sense of like the female lead singer going directly against the regime that she's opposing against, right? But I want to drive this home as the danger being that your career could be ended. Okay. So when we think about what a 2-year ban means of no travel and no artistic activities, what does that really mean if you were the manager of an artist today and you couldn't work, you couldn't be productive for 2 years? You couldn't put out any videos, you couldn't put out any poetry, you couldn't do anything. At this point, all you can do is just work. I don't even know if they'll let you even like teach lessons and things like that. Does that count, right? So for 2 years, you can't do anything. And seeing how fast this industry has moved in the past 2 years, and how fast when we went over the history of music in the United States, how quickly things can move from 5 years from a record label being on record to actually being on gramophone to then suddenly being on cassette to then being on CD, and then CDs are obsolete to where we're in MP3, right? So in 2 years, you could miss a huge deal, you can miss a trend, you can miss a moment, you can miss an opportunity. But is it worth it to be lashed 74 times, get your entire band basically blackballed for 2 years, and then at the same time we pretty much only have the consistent story that we've always had this entire time? And that's the part that I think most people need to understand about my virus analogy, trying to like compare it to that. The typical virus that you can get sick of isn't different from the previous virus that got the other person sick, right? So it's the exact same process and story. The only difference is how that virus maybe, I don't know, take somebody out versus the other person that took medicine and got rid of it was really the circumstance, right? And it was really understanding the circumstance for the quote unquote patient in my example, right? So to relate it to what they're doing, the more opportunistic way to do what they were doing would have been to not only have the protest, but to make the protest benefit them, right? And I don't know what that would look like because I'm not living in their country and living under their regime and things like that. But it does beg the question as to why you would risk something like this so heavily if this is also the exact same way you want to get your message out, right? This would be like if you went into a gunfight and instead of pointing the gun with bullets in it at the target that you're trying to get, you start like turning the gun around and handing it to them and seeing if they could work the gun better, right? You're basically testing the threat. You're challenging the threat just so the threat can then commit to what the threat has always been, which is a threat. And so that's the thing that we're driving home today, because protest has not been reinvented for musicians. This is not new. So you're going to see this happen again. We've seen protests where artists get on stage and they start, going on long speeches and things like that. We've seen artists do symbolic performances like this one, whether it's in the street, whether it's online. We've seen artists kind of like protest, whether it's the music industry or whatever agenda or thing that they believe in needs protest. And it's been through music. The only other issue that most people are going to have to deal with is that the consequences have to benefit you. Okay. So like if you're going to be Bob Marley, like it has to make sense. If you're going to be Prince, it has to make sense. You want to be Ice Cube and NWA, it has to make sense. There's no real point of just doing the thing and then you no longer can advocate for the thing you're protesting anymore because of the law. Like it just doesn't make sense, right? You got to be smart if you want to protest, is my point here, right? So performing a politically charged anthem that directly references detained anti-government protesters while visibly refusing to wear the mandatory hijab was a conscious choice to challenge the regime's red lines, right? And for independent artists remaining inside Iran, navigating state censorship, intimidation, and the threat of arbitrary arrest is a known daily reality. So that's my point here, right? In America, we have what's called gangster rap, right? And gangster rap has this theme that runs through it where everything's cool till it isn't, right? And that's how I will shape it, right? Meaning like you'll have Snoop Dogg and Tupac Gangsta Party all the way down to like Bitch You Guessed It by OG Maco, right? And the gangster rap thing isn't so much like, oh, it's violent and scary. It's more so that everything is cool until it isn't, right? And what we've noticed is over time, we started to kind of be able to identify where gangster rap kind of like thrives, where the audience likes to listen to it, what the lifestyle looks like, and who's really about the life, right? And so what we began to develop was a bit of a culture around it musically. So now you see situations where people go into the club armed, people are going to the club and they're clicking up, as they would call it, where they want to hang out with certain groups because of their affiliation to other organizations and groups. And then you'll start to understand how to navigate in the music industry. And that is where you'll get new rappers getting into the scene. And maybe they're not as affiliated in, let's say, gangster criminal activities. So they try to stick to the music side of things. And what you'll notice is they'll be able to navigate and thrive through it, right? And what we also can pay attention to are the artists that cannot do that as well. And so what we want to do here is we want to be able to look at how you can thrive and navigate through dangerous situations, whether it's a regime like your government or whether it's just the culture that you've grown up within and the lifestyle you've kind of built for yourself, right? Being smart is the key thing, right? And so with American gangster rappers, they've pretty much learned how to invest in themselves in a few different ways, right? They can take the lifestyle that has gotten them into music and learn how to make that into a more legitimate business model. They've also had other options where they've just fully turned their life into the life of a musician, where they've turned away from a life of crime completely, right? And that can look like a few different ways. Like Wiz Khalifa is a great example of taking a lifestyle that is not really popular and then turning it into something that you can actually thrive from. And then let's say somebody like a Styles P, where they can take their rapping grimy type of like lifestyle and turn that into something completely different by the end of their career, or like the point of their career they're in now. And so when we see that, we can say, okay, amidst all of the things that are against you, as if you want to use gangster rap as example, a black person in America with a criminal background, you can still thrive. You don't have to go to jail. You don't have to die in the streets and things like that. 50 Cent is another great story. And so if we know that to be true, then we look at situations like this where you have an entire band put their careers at risk for 2 years and 74 lashes. It begs the question of how they're going to turn this into a benefit. Okay. Now we can talk about the messaging. We can talk about the symbolism. That's why I said the lead singer being female, as well as the direct resistance that they're placing against their regime, is all symbolic and nice, but it doesn't help them thrive. But it does add another, I guess you can say, thread to the story that we have here. And that's really all they're going to have at the end of this. Unless there's a plan for at the end of these 2 years, you're going to do something musical that you can actually thrive from. Because if you do this again, it's just going to get you the same consequence all over again, right? So when we're considering these things, I think most of the time when we look at our favorite musicians, we assume they're going to make it. They're going to do the right thing. Or when we see female artists in America, the big thing they'll do is they'll like go out and make a part of their performance symbolic. And that's nice, but it doesn't, it has to be tangible, right? The protest you have has to be tangible and beneficial at the same time. Like it can't be just symbolic, but it also can't be symbolic without some kind of benefit, right? So what they essentially did was they symbolized through a song that was already written the protest that they have against the dress codes and the censorship in their state. And they did that just to be punished by that state. So it's just something to think about when you want to, actually protest as an artist. But that's all just, my perspective on it. Let's actually get into what's actually being said out there by the news and things like that from the articles themselves.
A young Iranian singer is at the center of a global controversy after reports emerged that she has been sentenced to corporal punishment for performing a song without a hijab during a live-streamed concert. 29-year-old Parastoo Ahmadi has reportedly been sentenced by a court in Iran's Qum province to 74 lashes. The case has sparked widespread outrage among human rights groups and artists around the world. The incident dates back to December 2024, when Ahmadi performed a patriotic song titled Az Kun Javanane Vatan, which translates to From the Blood of the Youth of the Homeland. The performance was live-streamed on her YouTube channel and quickly went viral, attracting millions of views. Shortly after the video circulated online, Ahmadi and several musicians who participated in the concert were briefly detained by authorities. While they were later released, a formal investigation was launched into the performance. That investigation has now reportedly led to a sentence not only against Ahmadi, but also against 8 other individuals involved in the production.
Okay, so why do you think they were released and then a actual, I guess you can say, more primary investigation happened? I forgot the word he used. The reason I come up with in my head is that they probably detained them for the initial visualization and the symbolism that was there of her not wearing the hijab. But I think once you get into the deeper thoughts of like, okay, you guys planned this, all of you knew what was happening. It's not like she came out and they was like, oh, what's going on? What's going to happen? Or whose idea is this? When you start to get into that kind of conversation, from the government's perspective, they're trying to figure out, okay, do y'all have a problem with us? Is that what's going on right now? And so apparently through their investigation, if we were to hold their investigation to any type of, I guess, integrity, and based on what the musicians themselves are saying, they have proven that, yes, the production team, as well as their lead singer, knew exactly what they were doing, knew exactly what they were trying to say, and knew exactly where they were when they did it. So that right there goes directly against the laws that we saw where they were saying they were distributing immoral content and things like that, because it's not something that the government that they're underneath represents, right? So what's the smarter way to do what they did? How can you get this exact same message off but not be arrested, not go to jail? You know, and this is where I be saying, for most people, you're going to have to know how to see a problem and be able to solve for it. What they essentially did is they threw a tantrum. This is what I would call a tantrum. When in America, we were doing the big Black Lives Matter protests and stuff like that. That's where I kind of got that term from. Like, people were just throwing tantrums. There wasn't really an actual progressive movement being pushed, right? And this is a tiny, 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 tiny little piece of what could be done as far as a band. So I think what they could have and should have maybe done, you actually have a few options nowadays. You could have done a completely original song, and that original song in some way metaphorically represents what you're saying, because there's a thing about protests where people feel like they need to be so blunt, so direct, because we watched Batman once and the dude blew up a hospital or some shit. But you can actually code messages within your music through not even just lyrics, but just the feeling, the imagery, the visualization, right? And so governments know this. This is what they use it for propaganda all the time. But because governments know that, they don't want to give you the weapon to directly resist them. And you guys showing your hand like this, like, yeah, we don't like you guys, is giving them the ammo to arrest you and then ban you from doing the thing that they're trying to get you to not do in the first place, right? So to be smart about this, one of the ways you can do it is to write an original song and then code your messaging within the music, right? I don't know how you would do it or what it would say, but you can do that, right? The other thing is that if you already understand visualizing a woman without a hijab is already going to give you an offense, don't do that. Right. The other thing you could have done here is you could have swapped the singer. And unfortunately, this is the thing that people really, really hate about protests. But if you pay attention to, like, let's say the Rosa Parks incident, where they actually had 2 people they were considering for this protest, though it was planned, it was very much, everybody was pretty much aware of what's going on. There were actually 2 people considered for that protest, and they swapped one for the other because of the symbolism it represented, right? So here's what I would have done. I would have actually had a man sing that song, encoded the message in the music to represent him resisting the government in some way, I don't know, to where he is advocating for the women on behalf of them. Because what you're doing when you do this, when you put the lead singer who's a female in a protest like this that's female oriented, you make her the target, which is why we don't know the band's name. We know her name, and her getting lashes is more of a, I guess you can say, controversy than you as a bass player back there getting lashes or the drummer getting lashes. Nobody's looking you up, right? And you're just as valuable in terms of musicianship to her, right? She would look at you as like a bandmate. So it's not like she thinks any less of you. But in reality, you don't represent the same thing as what she represents. And you're the tool, literally, to allow for this process to occur, right? So if you're going to get lashed 74 times and then get banned for 2 years, why not make it beneficial, right? So then the other thing we have to figure out here is like, okay, since they knew all of this was going to happen, and since they planned for this to happen, there's no way you can expect grace from the thing that you're looking at. It means you fully understand the threat you're going up against, meaning like, they can clearly ban you, probably ban you for longer. And from this point on, because of what you did being a live stream and it being music and this coding thing I just explained, they're going to be looking through everything you do for the rest of your musical career with a fine-tooth comb because of what you just did. And you basically showed your hand, right? So how can we be smart about this, and how can we not get banned for 2 years and not get beat 74 times?
Along with 74 lashes, the court has also imposed a 2-year travel ban and a prohibition on artistic activities for all those convicted. According to reports, Iranian prosecutors relied on 2 legal provisions to justify the ruling. The first is Article 638 of Iran's Islamic Penal Code, which criminalizes actions considered violations of religious norms, including appearing in public without a hijab. The second is
Okay, so that's actually important to point out. So again, this is not things that we are saying are right or wrong. We're saying we do or do not know these things exist. That's the point here. So it says the first article, 638 of Iran's Islamic Penal Code, which criminalizes... Whoops, I lost my button here. Okay, there we go. It criminalizes actions against violations or actions considered violations of religious norms. So they know their religious norms, and violating them justifies their, I guess, the amount of lashes or whether or not they get lashes and things like that. Now, I think the greater protest here, though, is that what they're asking for, and what most people in the human rights advocacy and things like that are actually asking for, is improvements and I guess you can say updates to these laws and these penal codes, so that way they're not as harsh and stringent. But here's the issue. It's bound by a religion. So at that point, you're not really challenging freedom. Like we're not really oppressing you by like, oh, you just can't do that because we say you can't do that. They're actually saying you can't do this because the religion says so. So now you're in a situation as a musician where if you want to actually participate as a musician, you have to fit in within the culture, right? Now, if you don't like the culture, reasonable people would say we should advocate for changing the culture, right? We should make differences, and we should actually pursue improvements and things like that within our states and our regimes and things like that. The issue you have, though, is going along with that thinking and then pulling it off have to benefit you. Like, you can't just blow everything up and then think somebody else is just gonna pick up the pieces. That's not how that works. So again, they know that these penal codes are against them as musicians, all of them. Hopefully they have some kind of like contract amongst them, so that way the band doesn't get sold or something in 2 years. But so they understand the risk of breaking this penal code here.
Considered violations of religious norms, including appearing in public without a hijab. The second is Article 743 of the Computer Crimes Law, which targets the online distribution of content deemed morally offensive or corrupt.
Okay, so deemed morally offensive or corrupt. So when you think of that, you will probably use your own moral compass and say, I don't see what's wrong with what she did. And then when you think of corruption, you probably think of your idea of corruption and say, I don't see how what she did was corrupt. But you got to remember what direction the law is speaking from, what perspective it's speaking from. It's not speaking from, can we help this young woman walk around in public with a hijab freely? That's not the direction it's speaking from. It's speaking from the structure and sovereignty of that of which she has to perform her music. And if she knows this, that means that she knows that if you have to uphold, let's say, the religious views online, you have to uphold the religious views out in the public when you have to wear a hijab, then that means going against that would be the corruption. You would be corrupting the culture that has been written in law, right? So that part right there, I think a lot of people get confused, because I used to get this confused when I used to look at like crime dramas and stuff like that, and you'd be like, oh man, that's a corrupt cop. He's breaking the law. And it's like, yeah, literally, he's breaking the law. That's what makes it corruption, right? But then you'll have situations where like somebody may, I don't know, do something in a approach that you don't agree with. Maybe they're like talking to the witness a little too aggressive or something like that. That's not corruption. And so I think what we get confused a lot of times is, what is the perspective of the language that's being used? And this is why reading contracts is going to be key on this channel when we get doing that next month. But a lot of what you're looking at isn't necessarily meant to benefit you. It just is. Okay. And so now that they know these things exist, they decided to directly break these two penal codes. So knowing that, yes, we may feel like they should break these codes. We don't like these codes. They shouldn't be there. But because they knew of them and then broke them, the government has to then do something, right? Otherwise, then everybody else can just start breaking penal codes. So how can they do what they just did and be smart? I don't know if any other penal code stops them from recording music and writing a certain way or things like that. But like I said, I would have had a different person performing the song, and then the song would have been original, so that way they would have to decode, because apparently they're performing a song that is widely known to be protesting the exact state that they live in. So it's not like they did anything that was like profound outside of just taking the hijab off on the live stream. That was probably the most profound thing. But in general, they basically retold the same story, which gave the same threat against them another bullet to put in the chamber. That's pretty much all they did. And it got them 74 lashes and banned for 2 years.
However, the case has drawn strong criticism from legal experts and human rights defenders. Human rights lawyer Moin Kazali has argued that singing and performing music are not criminal offenses for women under Iranian law.
That may be true, but that's not what they used against them to justify the punishment.
He also says that corporal punishment, including flogging, violates international human rights standards and is widely considered by global organizations as a form of torture.
That may be true, but it is something that they do over there.
The ruling has also triggered condemnation from activists and international rights groups. Bahar Gandhihari of the Center for Human Rights in Iran said the case reflects how little progress has been made on women's rights and freedom of expression in the country.
Okay, so when we talk about how little progress has been made on women's rights and freedom of expression in the country, we have to really consider not only the historical aspect of things, but we also have to consider which woman is speaking. Okay, we're not talking about, like, honestly, like a direct victim in this particular conversation. She may have a story, but my point is this particular woman is not the representation of the, I guess you can say, the downtrodden of the situation. And here's why. Because she's a success, because of the live stream, she is a successful musician who has had the opportunity to express herself in her own country. Okay, so that it's really, I know it sucks. It's a weird thing to say. It's because if you correlate it to the gangster rap thing, right? Gangster rappers felt in a way oppressed by the law. Like they felt like they couldn't say the things they wanted to say and live the lifestyle they wanted to live, right? But what generally people started to realize was that gangster rappers weren't the actual downtrodden people they claimed to be. They were just musicians who have committed crimes. And so now that we've made that correlation, when you see an actual criminal, an actual gangster and things like that, they're not trying to sing songs. They're not trying to wear bright chains and look all gangster and stuff like that. So what she's advocating for, though it may be a real thing, she doesn't actually represent it. She represents symbolically the best version of it, right? So that'll be like, I'll use myself for an example. If I were to represent black men, right? There's versions and ideas and, you know, I guess you can say examples that all people who are hearing my voice right now could come up with in their head, right? But the issue that you're going to have is, how do you advocate for us as a group? One of the things somebody could say is that black men like hip hop music, just in general, right? But that's not definitively just in general true. It's like a shot in the dark. Like 90% of the time you'll be right if you say that, but that's not the case, right? So then if you were to get somebody that hates hip hop, but they're a black man and they want to start advocating for whatever reason hip hop shouldn't be a good thing, do you think he would represent the general black consensus or the general black like experience, right? And so what we're seeing now is typically what you see really from musicians and artists a lot of time is that a particular woman was chosen to represent something that she may or may not be experiencing in order to advocate for something that the woman who can't speak actually is experiencing. And we've heard this with La Russell when he was talking about being heaven sent and things like that. That's not your job as a musician, right? And the reason why it's not your job is because you wind up becoming the thing you say you represent inadvertently, and you don't have to. You can thrive as a musician, you can be successful, and you can express yourself without actually being the thing you represent. And that's again shown through, in my example, gangster rap, where you have a bunch of people talking very angrily over hip hop beats that don't have any affiliation to criminal activity. There's just really no reason to be a criminal and then try to rap, right? So if we know that, there's really no reason to be a musician and try to be a protester. There's really no reason unless you know the consequences. Then you can just follow through the consequences. So essentially, this woman decided to, with her team, that's why I don't know why they don't highlight that the rest of the team was also punished as well. But her and her team decided to just do this concert with essentially the goal to be banned and be lashed and to represent the symbolism of a song that was already written. You see how they don't really like directly, like hands on the feet, hands on the ground, represent the problem that they're protesting, right? This isn't an artist trying to create an original song who's being suppressed by the government. This is an artist who had the freedom to do all the things and then chose to abuse it.
Prominent voices in the entertainment industry have also spoken out. Iranian British actress Nazanin Boniadi and activist Masih Alinejad have both condemned the punishment, arguing that women in Iran continue to face severe consequences simply for expressing themselves publicly.
Okay. And that, I believe that right there is where the musician side of things gets misconstrued. So the women that was advocating for this right here, the two ladies earlier, what they expressed is a fact. Okay. Iranian women suffering through these things is literally a problem. The other side of this is that the specific Iranian woman that we're talking about right now was not one of those women. So now you have a situation of she's being touted as the one to be representation of all other women because of this punishment being highlighted because of how they represented this, right? This is essentially why they made the live stream. Their idea is to get her to be in such an influential, high status position to where if she suffers the same things that other women have suffered through publicly, we can now highlight the problem, right? But the issue that they're now dealing with is that you have now been silenced by the very threat you went up against. You didn't, like, you basically got in the ring saying you're going to win, and then the first punch knocked you out. Now we got to wait for you to recover. And so your particular perspective now has been shut down because now we're letting advocates talk for you. we're letting, I guess you can say, representatives speak for you. And this is why I was pointing out in my smarter example would be to write an original piece of music, because then you can control what you're trying to say through your own understanding. Because at this point now you can't speak. The government's gonna be watching you for 2 years, and all these advocates are gonna come out, right? And if the advocates say something you don't agree with, you don't believe in, or if they put you in even more trouble because they want to keep putting your face on this protest instead of you being a musician, that's the consequence you're gonna have to deal with from now on. You're not going to be able to be a musician anymore. Like, you've now made this an entirely different thing that's bigger than you. So it begs the question as to why you picked up instruments in the first place as a kid.
They say the case highlights a broader pattern of restrictions placed on artists and cultural figures who challenge official rules, especially around dress codes and online expression. As of now, Iran's judiciary has not officially published the ruling, and details remain based on reports from rights groups and legal sources who claim to have reviewed court documents. But the impact of the case is already being felt widely. For many observers, this is not just about one singer or one performance. It is being seen as part of a larger crackdown on artistic freedom in Iran.
Okay. A larger crackdown on artistic freedom in Iran. This is where I have to take my American hat off and then put my human hat on for a second. They are in the state of Iran. Like, they're there. It's not like they're at war with Iran or anything like that. They literally are there as Iranian people, right? So that would be the equivalent of me here in America saying I don't like, let's say, the Second Amendment. So I start mishandling guns, right? You see what I'm saying? Like, just to highlight the danger of guns, I start mishandling guns. That's would be the equivalent here. So what I think we're dealing with here is that, like he said, it's become bigger than this one singer's performance, to where now she's now a part of a bigger problem. But the problem that they're up against is that the identity of an Iranian is tied to their culture. So in order for anybody to advocate for the change of their culture, the people who identify with that culture have to represent that change, right? And so this is why I said you really wouldn't want to have the woman sing the song, because she wouldn't be the one to represent the change. She's the victim in that situation. So if you were to have a man sing the song that's originally written and would actually have some coded message for men to understand how they can help the women not be victims, that there can then possibly nudge closer to a solution. But what I'm trying to explain here is that her musicianship has actually been, I guess you can say, hijacked by the movement, because her symbolism, her aesthetic, and things like that represents the thing that motivates society. So, like, if she was dark skinned, not as attractive, overweight, and couldn't sing that good, this would just look like a church video. If the equipment wasn't super expensive and, or up to par with standards and things like that, or if the live stream was lagging and things like that, this wouldn't be a conversation. So the level of intention to go into what she's representing has to be objectively looked at, because what you're going to then see from the following 2 years after they've been banned is that everybody's going to try to talk for them as if these people represent the bigger issue, and they don't. And this happens a lot with, I see it in America, where we'll get protests, it'll be like racism or something like that, and somebody will go to jail for like breaking a window or kicking a car or getting arrested for resisting the cops or something like that, and then the rest of society just starts talking for them, where they don't ever get to explain their perspective of things, and they also don't get injected back into society, and their voice is now heard again. So I'm just pointing that out because I had to take the, oh man, that's crazy, she's a girl going through what she's going through, and take that hat off and then put on the, well, there's a better way to do this hat, okay?
And for artists working inside the country, the message appears clear. Even a song, when shared publicly, can become an act of defiance with serious consequences.
And that is a fact that I think artists need to know, because if they don't know that, then they'll just be writing their emotions on to tape or on the screen and things like that, and you will be punished. You really will be punished. And I think for most people, being punished is the part that we want to focus on. But it's kind of like if you were trying to get rich or something like that. It doesn't it make sense to protect your assets, to be wise about how you use your money instead of just using it how you feel it should be used, right? Because there's consequences that comes with it, right? This is a concept of sacrifice that most musicians struggle with because they're very, I guess you can say, that creative, floaty, expressive mindset doesn't really ground you in the realities of the world a lot of times. And so you'll have people like human rights advocates pushing and putting batteries in artists' back, where now you're at the Grammys talking about racism when you make pop music, or you're talking about nonviolence and you're a gangster rapper, or you want to see more wholesome communities and social societies, but you make party music every day. So it's like, you have to really be the source of the thing that you want to talk about. And especially if it's going to be a protest, because you could be the bass player from a girl who's going to get you banned for 2 years, and you're just the dude who gets whipped for it. And no one knows their names or anything like that. Like, you can look it up, but are you going to look it up? Do you care? Is there human rights advocates for the dudes who are musicians who got to deal with this stuff, and or just, you know, the camera guy and the girl who does her makeup and stuff like that? Like, how does any of that matter to you guys if we're going to focus on this one person? So let's deep dive a little bit more into how these artists are protesting, and we're going to get into the next clip here and see how it actually works for someone else.
Kid Cudi fires M.I.A. for a pro-Republican GOP rant. And M.I.A. is like, I can't believe I'm being penalized for being brown and Republican. It ain't that. Here it is.
Can't do illegal. That some of you could be in the audience. All right, I'm illegal. Half of my team are not here because they didn't get the visa. Okay, I want you to know that.
Okay, before we get the host's actual reaction here, this is M.I.A. She's the girl that does Paper Planes, really good music, but I think for her, she's a vibe artist. I don't think she's like I'm gonna try to be the best artist. I think she's more of like, you know, yo, it's me, it's M.I.A., whatever, you know. So for her, she's basically saying I guess she's trying to advocate for migrants or against migrants. I don't really understand her point, but this is besides that. Like, we could get into that and all that other cool stuff. The host might do it here, but the point here I want to get here is that, just like being the bass player of the previous band that we just talked about, imagine being the bass player for Kid Cudi and you go on tour and the crowd is booing because one of the artists that you guys booked is up here ranting instead of doing their songs, right? Should she be doing this? I would say no. I would say there's, again, a better way to do this as a musician. Again, you can write original music, code it into your music, make it feel good at the same time, or motivational and inspiring. But she chose to just talk, right? And this is a thing that I think you guys are going to struggle with as musicians, because you guys think that because you're on stage, this is the chance. And when we were talking about Live Nation and the ticket sales and how much people pay for their tickets and things like that, people aren't expecting to just hang out with you. And this is also why I tell many people to get off of social media if you don't plan on making money. Like, Kanye West says, Instagram got your bitch. And pretty much every girl online has like a bunch of photos of themselves and a link that goes nowhere. And they don't make no money on the 17 social media sites they got on their phone. And it's just a bunch of people hitting like over and over again to the same groups. For dudes, it's like a bunch of gym photos and a bunch of like memes and stuff like that, and they're not making any money. They got a link to somewhere that's not going anywhere and things like that. But then if you pick certain people's Instagram profiles, they actually have platforms, actual content, actual conversations, and actual motion on their apps and things like that, instead of just existing on a profile there just for no reason, right? So when people pay to come see you, especially on a tour with an artist that you're opening for, like it's not your tour, then that means when they pay to come see you, they want to see the real deal. Which is why, if you were to compare it to social media, most of you get on the free apps and just ghosting, or not ghosting, but lurking around in the background with blank profiles and things like that, arguing with little kids and stuff. That's what you guys are doing. But if you had to pay it to be on an app, you would want that shit to make sense. Whether it's a subscription app for like movies, porn, whether you want to watch, you know, music videos all day, whatever it is, you guys would make it make sense to pay that money, right? So for her, she thinks it makes sense to know that information because she's a successful artist who has done shows before, and use this as an opportunity to just talk to y'all about how she feels about what's going on in the world. And so when they started booing, I'm pretty sure the tour manager, Kid Cudi, and everybody else on the production team had to figure out, well, how do we make this benefit? How does your protesting benefit us?
I'm not here because I didn't get the visa, okay? I want you to know that.
Man, miss, because you got booed, as the catalyst was because of what you said, but put it up full mass. So Kid Cudi announced that he has now fired that person as one of his openers on his tour over a pro-Republican rant, part of which you listened to. Now, the move comes after a viral rant where she made this rant on May 2nd during a Dallas date where she was booed during a monologue. Now, she's not there to provide monologues, okay? Now, I'm going to explain to you, M.I.A, why you got fired. It's not because of your pro-Republican stance or your rant per se, all right? So you gave a monologue in which you included lines like, quote, "I've been canceled for many reasons. I never thought I would be canceled for being a brown Republican voter." End.
Y'all gotta give up this brown thing. That's not real. Ma'am, you're not brown. That's not a thing. For those of you who don't know why I said that, white and black is like a United States thing. It's not a world thing. Like white and black specifically comes from identifying yourself as being a descendant of slave or not, right? So when y'all say brown, it makes me think that you think that South Indians are the same as South Koreans, right? And then you'd be like, no, those are Asians. And then Asians would call themselves person of color. And so it doesn't make sense. It's like, again, you're attaching yourself to something that don't represent you. But that's just give up the brown thing. That's not a real thing. So she thinks she's being canceled for, we're going to remove brown, for being a Republican voter. But the problem, I think, for most of these musicians is that we don't really need to know who you voted for. Like, I think let's just pick a random person. I don't know. A$AP Rocky could be a Republican. I wouldn't care. I just would care that he has music or not, you know? I just don't care. Beyonce could be a Republican. I just would not care, right? So the fact that she thinks that matters to her fans speaks to what she views her music as. You see what I'm saying? And what that means is that her music for her doesn't just represent beats, drums, singing, and dancing. For her, it means her identity. Like, you listen to M.I.A, in her opinion, based on what she's saying, because you agree with her. You think like her. You live like her and things like that. And I don't think that's the case for most of you guys. I think you guys listen to 2 Chainz and gangster rap and got kids and a job. I don't think you guys are relating to your music that way anymore. So either she's completely disconnected from her fan base, like completely, because clearly they're booing her on stage, or her management has misguided her on what her job is.
Quote. She also said, quote, "I can't do illegal, though some of you could be in the audience," end quote. Her words were first amplified by social media posts via Reddit. Now, she has turned this festive concert into a political controversy. She provides a monologue when she is supposed to provide entertainment. She doesn't check in with Kid Cudi, who's in charge of this whole outfit, before she does any of this, which is disrespectful to such a degree. Now, Cudi announced her departure from the tour on May 4th via Instagram, where he wrote, quote, "Tour update. M.I.A. is no longer on this tour. I told my management to send a notice to our team before we started tour that I didn't want anything offensive." He said, before we started the tour, I didn't want anything offensive at my shows because I already knew what time it was. And I was assured things were understood. After the last couple shows, I've been flooded with messages from fans that were upset by her rants. This, to me, is very disappointing. And I won't have someone on my tour making offensive remarks that upset my fan base. Thank you for understanding. That's it.
So M.I.A. did the exact same thing we seen in the last clip, right? And most people, you could look at the consequences and try to like weigh them. You can be like, oh, one is like 74 lashes and a 2-year ban, and another one is you getting kicked off a tour. But the point here that I want to drive home for you guys is that she and both bands, the one in Iran and M.I.A., chose to protest instead of doing their job. Because doing your job is boring. Doing your job doesn't get you the looks. It doesn't get you, like, I wouldn't talk about it. Nobody would talk about it, right? You would just have done your job, right? And so what people are feeling like protest represents today is just being volatile. And that's not protesting. That's not smart. That's not wise, right? Like, this is a tiny, tiny, small, nicer version of what could be happening to musicians where, you know, you just get kicked off a tour or a sponsorship or something like that. But it creates a resume. It creates a trail where now you're known for this. There's a reason people feel the way they feel about Donald Trump. And it's usually, you know, how they have felt over time. It's not like they just suddenly found something they don't like, right? And so what you'll then get to start shaping is your actual network. So if you were to call, just to compare Kid Cudi to a government regime who said, hey, don't talk about this when you go and perform and do your job, which is to perform and make music. And you know that, just like the previous band in Iran, and you break that specific rule, it's almost as if you want the consequence. It's almost as if you aren't saying the consequence is bad. It's almost as if you desire it. But that's a perspective that you could have if you look at the rules as something meant to be withheld. So I think the issue here that comes with protesting is that many people believe it needs to be volatile, and it needs to be directly destructive of, let's say, the structure that's in front of you. And that's not necessarily the case, because she could have easily have written a new song and debuted it and had her record label actually making money and actually, you know, getting her message out at the same time, and then also not getting kicked off the tour and exposing more people to her beliefs. She could have just made some like snarky little immigration line in the song or something like that. But instead she chose to rant, which is not a bad thing. You have freedom of speech to rant, but should you rant here? Should you rant now? Should you rant at all as a musician? Like, is this your job? Is this what you get paid to do?
If she hit back. Now keep in mind, she's the opener for him. Okay? He's in charge of the tour. According to him, we had an agreement.
Okay, and so this kind of parallels what we saw with the Iranian band. The state is actually allowing you to live stream your music as a woman, as a lead singer. They just say, don't mess with our culture. Don't resist us publicly. Don't do that publicly.
Because he already knew what was up. So he has an agreement. This is clear cut. This is just basic respect at this point. Okay? According to him, this.
Now, how many of you feel like that respect line that he just said isn't a fact? How many of you feel like in the Iranian case, it wasn't about basic respect? And this is where, again, I got to take my American hat off and put my human hat on, right? If the regime there in Iran has developed the culture of where women have to wear hijabs in public, and that's what they have set forth in their state, going against that is disrespectful.
This agreement is violated by the controversy of these comments and the monologue. His fans are upset. You are there because of his fans. He is there for his fans. His fans are there for him. Now, she hits back on X, okay, with a very long message.
Woo.
I got an excerpt. All right, we don't need the full message. Quote, I wrote Illegal in 2010. I played a song that had lyrics saying, F the law, which I still believe. If the law is unjust, F it. I wrote.
Okay, so yeah, she's actually very quickly showing the thing that I said you should not do as a protester. She said if you don't agree with the law, F it. That's not protesting. That's not how you protest the law. You're supposed to, okay, at least if you don't like laws, like if you just don't like laws, then that's a thing. But if you think a law is bad, that means you still just, it's still a law. Like you have to like change it and like make it a better law. So the volatility in her perspective, even just in this response right here, kind of proves true in that I don't think she would be wise enough to be able to protest and then benefit from it. You have to be smart, bro. When I think it was like a Malcolm X movie or something like that. There was a scene where they were trying to recruit like a young dude into their organization, and they were like, yeah, we got the best weapon for you ever. And he was like rubbing his hands. He thought he was gonna get a pistol, and he opened the drawer behind the desk and he thought he was gonna pull out like a big revolver with bullets or something like that. And he pulled out a big old book. He said, you need to think, you need to be smart, right? So if you want to protest your government, or you think laws are bad, like certain laws are bad, or if you don't like laws at all, it has to benefit you and make sense. It can't just be destructive and volatile for no reason. I think a lot of this comes from because when we watch movies today, the writers and directors aren't that good at portraying smart characters. So we just look at characters that run fast, jump loud, or can curse and say curse words very well, and we think they're like productive, and that's not the case.
Wrote borders and illegal and paper planes before you thought immigrant rights were cool. I've had these battles by myself without the help of millions of fans backing me. Jesus returns to lead the world justly because there is injustice in this world. I'm proud of those who fight for it every day. God bless you. Yeah, Cudi did the right thing. Her track record, despite being a citizen of the UK, M.I.A. decided to publicly endorse Donald Trump ahead of the 2024 election.
Okay, so this is nothing wrong with that, but I do want to wonder why, as a United Kingdom citizen, musician, you're talking about the American president election. I don't know why you're discussing that at all with anyone. I don't know.
It was a marked shift for the rapper who openly criticized the Republican during his first term in office before embracing Trump.
Okay, why are you criticizing an American president as a United Kingdom musician citizen? Why are you talking about us?
M.I.A. dabbled in some anti-vaccine conspiracies around the.
Why are you talking about vaccines as a musician? Okay. She tried to point out like paper planes and her songs talking about like illegal rights and stuff like that. But it makes me start to think that music is not your passion. You have a passion for using music as a tool to do something else. And I don't know what it is, because if this track record is any bit of consistent or any bit of like factual, then that means you have a problem with vaccines, some sorts of laws. You like Trump, who is very law and order oriented, and you're like very flip-floppy. So you're not really consistent in who you are, but you're empowered through music. So you're just leaning into music all the time to allow you to get your ideas off. Now, very, very problematic, because she again has other people working with and for her that rely on her intellectual property to be able to make a living. So her being this volatile puts them at risk as well.
Height of the COVID pandemic back in 2010. In 2024, she launched her clothing line, which she claimed was designed to protect wearers' privacy, autonomy, and rights over.
She don't even make clothes the right way. Like what? If you were supposed to make a shirt or a poncho that they say in here, just make a dope poncho. Why do you keep adding all these extra agendas to your poncho?
Their bodies and data by fending off.
She's a bit okay. I see what's going on here. She's a musician that wishes she was a Rainbow Six soldier. Like Rainbow Six soldiers today look like cartoon characters with Batman equipment. And she thinks she's that because she's been empowered through her music. And because she's been empowered through her music, she doesn't really have a tangible, productive skill outside of the musical skill that can translate into what she visions the world to look like. And now that's just a lot of words for me to just simply say, like, she wants world peace, but she can't pull it off. So she's going to sing about how there isn't world peace really, really loudly.
5G wireless signals with the clothes, finding the perfect niche to market the products. She appeared on conspiracy theorist Alex Jones' InfoWars to promote the 5G wireless signal blocking clothing line.
Yeah, I'm sure he's handpicking some of the things he's worked on, but it's still kind of like, why is this even in your resume other than it just being an interest of yours?
You know, if you just put some aluminum foil over your head, it does the same thing. Okay, all right, sharing thoughts here.
So I think for most people, when they see these situations, a lot of times, like I said, you're gonna look at this and you're gonna be like, "Oh man, that's crazy. She got kicked off tour for being a Republican," or maybe you don't like Republicans. You're like, "Yeah, kick her off the tour." But I think the greater question here is like, why would you tank your touring opportunity just to say some shit that you don't really need to be saying, right? Yeah, this is why I think a couple weeks ago, well, really like last month, we were talking about how like artists are investing in themselves. We seen Rick Ross with his car show, Chameleonaire with all his tech company, venture capitalism and stuff like that. It's like, you got to be smart enough to say, man, I don't like the situation I'm in. Let me figure out how to thrive. Like, those are two rappers that still rap and still make music, but they figured out how to thrive. And they weren't like, oh, the music is so bad and crying and shit on stage. Like, I don't know where y'all get that from. So what's a smarter way for M.I.A to do what she did? I already told you she should write original music. I don't know why that's not a thing for artists today. Write an original song, perform the song. But what I would have done is I would have did the tour, and either during the tour or maybe after the tour, dropped a video about the song. And then it would have just been a thing, and then we can move on. Because we got to keep making music. We can't keep advocating and things like that, right? So I would drop the video, and the video would either be a pre-recorded, really, really good. I'll probably get like a director, and it'll actually advocate for my message, right? It'll be like, yo, let me actually like put my message in the video. Or I would be making kind of like a vlog documentary style thing of me having conversations with people at the tour. And it wouldn't be so music focused because it's separate. It's a video. Like, I got the song here and I can do that on tour. And then when I get off stage, we can then produce like the message, right? But she didn't think of that part. I don't know. She just thought she would just get on the stage and get booed and it would benefit her. So let's get into the next clip.
Louis,
here.
We've talked many times about the sort of double standard that exists with non-Israeli Jews and a sort of assumed allegiance to Israel and double allegiance. And we saw that embarrassing, Diane Rehm on NPR, embarrassing herself by asking Bernie Sanders about his dual citizenship to Israel and the US and whether that would cause a conflict of interest. Of course, Bernie Sanders is Jewish, but he is not a citizen of Israel. And we've talked many times about the absurdity of this. And there's now an insane story that I was just disgusted by over the weekend. There's a Spanish music festival which demanded that Jewish American reggae star Matisyahu endorse
Jewish American reggae star. Okay.
Palestinian statehood for the weekend. There's a Spanish music festival which demanded that Jewish American reggae star Matisyahu endorse Palestinian statehood. And when he said, no, I'm not going to do a video endorsing Palestinian statehood just to play there, the concert told him, you can no longer play here. This is the...
Okay, so this is actually the opposite. This is interesting of what we've seen so far today. So, for some reason in Spain, they actually wanted him to endorse the Palestinian state. I don't know why. I don't know what that would have to do with the concert. I mean, I can think of a few conspiracy theories, but I don't know why you would want the artist to do that and not, let's say, the investors or the general populace there. Why do you want the artist to represent that, right? And so wisely enough, and I'm proud of him for doing this. He rejected that because what it would do is it would put a target on his back, just like the same girl in the Iranian band. It would put him in the light, in the spotlight of basically saying whether or not he does or does not endorse the Palestinian state, right? Now that doesn't just mean like, yeah, I bang with Brooklyn. Like that's not what that means. It means like I endorse all of the things that they represent and their agenda as well. And I'm pretty sure even if he did agree with that statement, he's seen that that would be a problem for him, his team, and his career. So it does beg the question as to why they would want him to do that. But then you also got to think about, well, why would someone say yes to that and then perform?
The Rototom Sunsplash Reggae Festival, which said no Matisyahu on August 22nd, because he would not make a written or video statement backing, quote, the Palestinians' right to a state. The BDS movement, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanction movement, which is one of the most vile and heinous groups that is out there right now, was putting a lot of pressure on festival organizers. And Matisyahu was also at risk in a sense, or being pressured, because other artists threatened to not show up if Matisyahu didn't make this statement. Now, Louis.
Okay, so that's actually pretty interesting. They actually teamed up together. But this does highlight something that many probably, especially American artists, never considered. Imagine going on tour and probably like the month of or the week of your show, you get an email like this. What decision would you make? Do you tell your team, no, we're going back to America? Do you tell your team we got to rethink the plan? Or do you tell your team, yes, we endorse Palestine? Like, what do you do in that situation as a leader, right? And that's why it was important for us to go through the first video where the woman was with the Iranian band, because you could be a drummer, you can be a saxophone player in the background, and now you're banned for 2 years to do anything creative. All that practice, all that skill, the hopes and dreams your mom had for the next 2 years of your life kind of have to be stalled because of this technically crime you committed in your own government.
Let's be very clear.
So in this instance, he's being punished for choosing not to just endorse something, right? And that's probably a waterfall effect of whatever's pressuring these venues to ask for this kind of endorsement.
Stu, the bassist for Matisyahu from Dub Trio, his backing band, is a fan of the show. You've hung out with him. I've hung out with him. You hung out with Matisyahu when they were in Austin, and we've been to a bunch of concerts in the Northeast on our end, and so we know them. And if that conflict of interest comes up, I want that to be clear. This absolutely disgusts me, regardless of who the artist is. And why, Louis? Because Matisyahu is not Israeli. Matisyahu is an American Jew, and there's no reason whatsoever why he should speak more for the foreign policy of Israel as a result of being a Jewish American.
I don't think we should hear about any of this. The dude makes reggae music. If he don't bop and clap his hands,
then a French American should be responsible for addressing French foreign policy if they're going to play a show in Australia, for example. But we know that it is far more acceptable to demand statements from random Jews around the world, regardless of their connection to Israel.
And so when I hear this stuff, I think of Bob Marley a lot of times. And Bob Marley was smart enough to fit a lot of his ideas into music, but I don't know if he had to deal with like politics in this way.
And this is the perfect example of the double standard that exists with regard to this. And let me say one more thing. With regard to the BDS movement seeks to strip Jewish Israelis of the exact same rights they claim to support for Palestinians. And the main goal of the BDS movement is the replacement of a Jewish state with an Arab state. This has been stated publicly many times, including by its co-founder. None of that matters here, though. My point here is Matisyahu is an American. He has no reason whatsoever to speak to Israeli foreign policy. And we know, and sadly, my dad's wife is from Spain, and I've spent a lot of time in Spain. There is significant anti-Semitism in Spain, and it is not surprising to me that this is the country where this took place. I love Spain, love the food, love the people, love the beaches, love so many things about it, but there is an anti-Semitism problem in Spain.
So it's interesting how they found a way to bring politics into like a reggae show, because it like, I don't get what the Semitism has to do with the music part. That's the part that's not really connected for me there. But I think it was wise of him to reject something like that, because if you sit there and you say yes to all this stuff, you'll wind up looking silly. And looking silly usually is okay until you have to actually like deal with the consequences, like the Iranian singer and things like that. So let's get into one more video, and then I'll go ahead and get you guys off for lunch here.
Listen up. It's just in. All the gossip. The Rumor Report. With Angela Yee. It's the Rumor Report. The Breakfast Club.
Well, Chrisette Michelle, we were talking about this morning on Tell 'Em Why You Mad, and she has a new album, a new song called Strong Black Woman, and she just talked about what she's been going through during this whole time since she performed at Trump's inauguration. She says the black community dropped her like crazy. She said, if social media wanted to pull me down, I guess they succeeded as it pertains to Capitol and Caroline Records. I completed an entire album, and my label decides to walk away from me. Capitol Records, I was quiet for a few days. I go into the studio and literally poured out my heart and soul, and the label decides to walk away from me. So not only did the whole black community drop her, so did her record label.
Yeeks.
Right. She said, I went from someone being revered and loved to facing putting out an album in the worst climate of my musical career.
So Chrisette Michelle decided she was going to do the Trump inauguration concert. And at the time, right, and I think this is kind of the thing that really is going to be on the other end of the spectrum of today's show. At the time, she wasn't protesting anything. She also wasn't advocating anything, but she was paid to perform there just because she was popular at the time and doing really well in music, right? So what people started to do, because she wasn't advocating or protesting anything, people laid and projected their agenda upon her, right? So when people seen her performing there, they assumed she advocated there. Now, that's a reasonable conclusion to come to. You know, if a certain person pays you to be there, you would probably endorse them, right? But because it wasn't such a, I guess you can say, heavy-handed expression, people just made the assumption, and then with the assumption came how they felt about the person she's endorsing, which was Donald Trump at the time, or they thought she was endorsing. So they basically applied their disdain for the president at the time onto her, and it got to a point to where, as a musician, she couldn't basically thrive through that. Now, there's really no way to plan for that unless you can read the room better than anybody, right? And I think for her, it wasn't about reading the room on how you guys felt about the president. I think it was more so just a gig for her. Now, this is a thing that I usually see with singers, because if you look at the Spain reggae artist situation we just seen in the last clip, that could just be an easy, oh yeah, I'll just make the video and then just move on and get my money. In this situation, it could have been the exact same thing. The only difference here is that how she made her money was just super stigmatized by all the things surrounding the politics. It had nothing to do with her musicality, her singing, her ability to make an album, or anything like that. It literally came down to who she was working for or with. So how do you do that? What's the smarter thing to do here? I'm actually stumped. I don't know how you can get around reading the room and then making the bag at the same time. Because I can see where if I was another person, like another black singer or black artist and things like that, and at that time of that inauguration, a lot of people who would have been doing more conservative gigs, more conservative representations, were of a certain genre of music or a certain lifestyle and culture. You weren't going to be like a hardcore gangster rapper and then representing a, Trump convention. Like, it just wasn't going to happen. And if you were, you would be met with a consequence usually. And So I don't know how you would navigate this other than just being able to withstand being canceled. So I guess in her example, being signed was probably the only vulnerability there. If she had some kind of independent situation, then you could fall back on that. But because you were actually signed to a really, really, really good record label, it was like that's the real crutch you have right there at that point.
Then she put suicidal thoughts. People ask how I'm so positive after all I've been through. When you're laying in bed naked next to a bottle of Bacardi and Xanax, when you wear pajamas morning and night, when you don't pick up the phone for weeks, months, when you're afraid to look at social media. I know I've sown positive seeds. I know I've lifted people. I know I've been a part of community activations and black empowerment. When a community sticks its middle finger up at you and completely forgets everything you've ever done, you are worthless.
So, yeah, the way she's feeling is actually an appropriate response to how she was being treated. Because if you compare this to again, when I was pointing out in the Iranian band example, how the woman in that group didn't represent the women she was protesting for, this is what I meant. The woman in this example here, Chrisette Michele, she represents the women who were turned or had backs turned on her. And she actually experienced that. So now if she wants to turn this into music, she has a more direct ability to write original music through this perspective. That's one thing. The other side of this is that the effects that she's dealing with are still handled through the lens of her being a female singer, possibly doing this alone in terms of like the brand's name is Chrisette Michele. Like it's not like Chrisette Michele and the band behind her. Like it's usually everything's riding on her, and then now it's looking like everything you did, like she said, has been tainted or no longer valuable. And so for her, yeah, depression could be easy, right? This idea that now I'm going to just stick it to the man and fight through isn't a thing within her. And it's not a thing that it has to be, but it's like, this is why you wouldn't position her to be the one to protest this. So if you wanted to protest for something like allowing artists to not be pinned down by, I guess you can say, politics and things like that, she shouldn't be the one to advocate for it. She should be the one to represent it, right? The people that should be advocating for things like this should be fans, should be record labels and things like that. Like Capitol Records should kind of, I don't know, have some kind of conversation about what actually they're looking for when an artist has a situation like this to bring clarity to everybody else, right? That's advocacy. But if you want to just start fixing things for her, like just start paying her money and paying for her GoFundMe, it's not really going to help her, because we've moved past music. We've moved past, you know, the performance and things like that. Like at this point, we're rebuilding a person now. She's talking about being in her pajamas all day and laying next to alcohol and pills. It's like, we can't even hire you no more if we wanted to. Forget the brand.
So she talks about having this suicidal thoughts, and she said that God was kind enough to soften the blow. I promise you, I felt him cover me like a blanket. I told him I was out of control. I told him I was having thoughts about leaving and not finishing at all. He's called me to. He listened. Therein lied my therapy. And then she said she had a miscarriage. She said that she was working out like a bodybuilder. And she said, my old habits of binge eating disorder began to show themselves, drinking maybe nothing but water for a day after a day of heavy intake. My trainer didn't.
So a lot of her, just to put on my manager hat, a lot of her lifestyle habits should have been checked earlier in her life. That's just one thing. Like a lot of these choices she's making through the backlash she's getting for this Trump inauguration performance, she's leaning onto them because she's always had them. Drinking, working out really hard is stressful, though it's fun. It is stressful. And binge eating and stuff like that. So clearly these have been issues in her life before we got here. Now they're just highlighting themselves. This is also something that when I talk about with fitness and food with people, they don't believe me when I say like you should try your best to avoid drinking alcohol, because if you can't find the thing that makes you feel the feeling you get when you drink alcohol, it will always be alcohol. And so for her, when she got really, really depressed, she started drinking. For some people, it can be when they're really, really happy or they want to party and they want to hang out. They grab alcohol. And so just keep that in mind with the things you cherish and the things you do every day. Like you may go pour a cup today after watching this, right? Pay attention to how many times you do that, right? And don't be like, oh, I do all right. No, actually like criticize it and be like, no, I need to make this like a certain standard. And that way, when you do find yourself in situations where, let's say you're a little more emotional, or maybe you're going through something like her, you have the standards to lean on and not just the alcohol or the food or the gym or crying all the time. You actually have like productive, exercisable practices that you can lean on.
Didn't know it, but he was
That's Patreon game for you artists out there. So if you smoke now, or if you do drugs now, or if you got like a bunch of girlfriends, just think about what the fuck that looks like.
feeding the demon that covered up hurt with food. I had a long cycle, and then she said, something came out of me. It was my child, the one my love and I worked so hard on. I never knew I could allow myself to be so broken that my physical body itself would break down. So she said she had a miscarriage, and then she said that yoga actually saved her life.
Really?
And that was the final one that she put. So.
Well, you know,
The cool thing about yoga, and I'm glad that it did work out for her, is because as an artist, when you're doing meditation and yoga and things like that, because bodybuilding is one thing, like working out, going to the gym, running and jogging, tracking your food is one thing, but when you do meditation and yoga, it basically makes you think about the present moment. So like if you're doing, let's say, a downward dog or something, like all you can think about is downward dog. Once you start thinking about like, oh, bills and life and what am I do later and laundry and stuff like that, you start messing up the downward dog. And so what that probably did for her is it probably had her, because it feels really good, but it probably had her now value the feeling she gets from it. But at the same time, it made it to where the practice of doing yoga allowed her to focus on what's in front of her. So that way she didn't distract herself with all the other bull crap because of the problems she was getting from, let's say, people leaving her mean DMs and being mean to her friends, or not booking her anymore, or like her record label leaving her behind and stuff like that, right? So these are all things you need to be thinking about. But all in all, I think that's all I have for you guys today. This was a dope episode on why you should be protesting as an artist and what it really looks like. And so in the Crescent Michelle story, her options there didn't really get her thriving until she landed on a good option, right? So when she had times to, I guess you can say, go against what everyone was saying towards her, she could have leaned into healthier choices, but she chose what was available to her based on her understanding and previous lifestyle. When it came to the reggae artist, he decided to reject politics in his music because it didn't make sense. And then as we dove a little deeper, it looked like it was the right choice because it really didn't have much to do with music based on that proposition. And then when we looked at the Iranian band, it seemed like a lot of what they were going through was something they expected. So that of which makes me question why you would want to call yourself a musician and not just a protester at that point. You know, if your goal here is to just shake things up and then be punished for shaking things up, put the instruments down. Like, stop acting like you're, a musician at that point. But that's all I have for you guys. Let me know what you guys think here in the comments. I will be reading them later, and I will be here online. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe so you can catch me all the time, and you can catch my latest videos. I got a lot of content that's coming out that's pre-recorded, and then we'll be working on different kind of series and things like that throughout the future months and things like that. But I will see you guys in the future on the next show, and I'm out, y'all.